And I just became discouraged by how many times I would open up the book. The story would be lame. It wouldn't go anywhere. It would just be dumb and silly. There wouldn't be anything that kind of like elevated the child's intelligence in any way. And then the knife in the heart, the illustrations would be like computer generated illustrations. Look, I don't mean to sound all like snobby, but I really don't like the quality of computer illustrations. It's just not the same. It feels like a book, like the book's just been kind of thrown together, and when the storyline is already so lame and the characters are not doing anything interesting, and then we also have dumb pictures, it's like, why are we giving that to our kid? And I know some people will be like, well, at least the kids are reading. I guess, but would I feed my child chips at every meal and say, well, at least they're eating? No, and so the same with books. It is my job to show them when they're little bitty. The first exposure they have to books is through me. And the first exposure they have to things that are good and true and beautiful and right and noble and calls them to something greater is through books. Hey, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is True Denise. Today's little video is not an episode of the book that we're reading, but it is instead a little short series that I want to start doing just about books in general and great reads and great books for kids and like the best book I ever read when I went on this journey to sort of like read the best books that had ever been written. And so they're just gonna be short videos. It's gonna be in its own playlist, but I wanted to bring you this one today, and I wanted to talk specifically about kids' books. I feel really passionately about kids' books because I have 3 kids of my own, and they currently right now are ages 12, 10, and 7. And when they were little, before we'd even had kids, my husband and I decided that we just weren't going to have screens in our home. We just weren't going to do it because it's just too tempting to sit your kid in front of the TV and let the TV babysit them. I knew that I would fall for that without a doubt. Like, I just knew that's how I would do, and I wanted to not be that kind of parent. And I'm not judging anybody who's like, I got to get something done, go watch 30 minutes of a show. Like, I understand. But I think for me, it was like very reactionary. It was probably a pendulum swing, really, because when I was growing up, when I had been younger, we hadn't done a lot of TV watching. But when I got older, into about middle school, high school era, my parents' marriage was on the rocks. They were getting a divorce. The TV became our numbing agent, and we were always, always, always watching TV. It just was like never off. And that's just kind of where we would go and emotionally check out. And so I knew my penchant for wanting to do that, for wanting to choose screen time over connection, because it's just easier. And so I just didn't want that to be like, I didn't want to introduce my kids to a coping mechanism that I knew had been really difficult for me growing up and something that I always ran to. So without screens, you still have to entertain your kids in some way, right? Because like sometimes, I'm not a super creative person, and sitting down for hours and playing like Barbies or Legos, or actually like Legos, or like just like little pretend games and stuff, I would begin to feel like really tapped out. And there's only so many things you can do with little kids. And sometimes you just want to sit and be still. And so books were like a lifeline to me as a young mother. We'd go to the library and we would get, and I'm not even kidding with you, no less than 30 books every time. And then we would just, in the afternoons after lunch, we'd sit down on the couch and we would just like read tons of books together. And in that experience, I realized the books that are being written right now for kids are garbage. Garbage! Anytime you go to like Barnes & Noble or any bookstore and you go to the kids section, it's debilitating to me how bad the offerings are for children. And, there's always like the classic book section, and, they've got some good books there, Make Way for Ducklings and things like that. But there was a time when kids' books were great. And now kids' books are preachy. They're always trying to teach a moral. They're trying to slide in political messages. They're constantly trying to parent you and teach you. And sometimes a kid just needs a story. And what I think is really ironic is there is so much truth and beauty and goodness that you can expose your children to without ever telling them, hey, I'm exposing you to truth, goodness, and beauty. because you're just giving them a fantastic story with beautiful illustrations. And so that kind of became my hunt was a fantastic story, and the pictures had to be good. Because when you're little and you can't read, you go into amazing worlds of fantasy and imagination from illustrations. I mean, I can remember so many books as a kid loving because the pictures transported me. And I would just stare at the pictures for hours. I mean, I do love art and I do love illustrations and all this, but I think that came from reading good books when I was a kid. And I just became discouraged by how many times I would open up the book. The story would be lame. It wouldn't go anywhere. It would just be dumb and silly. There wouldn't be anything that kind of like elevated the child's intelligence in any way. And then the knife in the heart, the illustrations would be like computer generated illustrations. Look, I don't mean to sound all like snobby, but I really don't like the quality of computer illustrations. It's just not the same. It feels like a book, like the book's just been kind of thrown together. And when the storyline is already so lame and the characters are not doing anything interesting, and then we also have dumb pictures, it's like, why are we giving that to our kid? And, I know some people will be like, well, at least the kids are reading. I guess. But would I feed my child chips at every meal and say, well, at least they're eating? No, and so the same with books. It is my job to show them when they're little bitty. The first exposure they have to books is through me. And the first exposure they have to things that are good and true and beautiful and right and noble and calls them to something greater is through books. And I don't want a book that sounds preachy. I don't want a book that sounds like it's trying to teach a child something. I want my children to hear good stories and to be inspired by those good stories. Because the greatest story that was ever written over our lives was the story of Christ coming to us, to earth, to die for us, to take our place, to save us from the sin and the degradation and the evil that was clawing at our souls. And he saved us from that and will take us to be with him as his bride in heaven. That is the story that goes over every beautiful story you ever read. The story of the story of strength coming and saving the damsel in this distress, the story of salvation to those who are losing, the story of good against evil is in every single story that has ever been worth reading, because every single story copies the greatest story. And so for me, choosing books that weren't preachy in the sense that I'm trying to teach you what's good, here is a virtue, but showing them what is good, true, and beautiful, that kind of became my little mini goal as a young mom. Now, I was cleaning up the kids' bedroom. My youngest son's bedroom is where the kids' bookshelf is now. Mother-in-law's coming into town. I couldn't let her think that we live like pigs. So I'm organizing the bookshelf. And this kind of when I got the idea of this idea for this video. And so I pulled just 10 books off my kids' bookshelf that I think are fantastic books. And we live in an age right now where you go to a kid's birthday party, you're like, what am I supposed to bring them? And you pick up some trinket or something to buy them. The parents receiving it is like, oh, great, another piece of trash I have to figure out where to put. It's probably got pieces that are going to go missing. It's probably going to end up in the garbage, in 6 months' time. What you should be buying children are not toys. You should be buying kids books. You're buying them an experience. You're buying them something they'll enjoy over and over and over and over again, especially if it's a good book. And especially if it's a book that the parent reading it will enjoy reading, because the child's going to want to hear it multiple times. So choose books you want to hear. Choose gifts for kids that are not something that's going to end up in the trash, that's not going to end up in a landfill, that's not just a bunch of little plastic pieces that, you as a mom are trying to decide every day, do I just go ahead and vacuum that up because I'm sick of seeing it? Right? Be the kind of gift giver that's going to help children's minds to be elevated. As a parent, as a guardian, as a grandparent, as a friend, give kids things that will help them. And what will help them is beautiful books with great stories. So I have 10 books here. I'm just going to go through them really quickly as just ideas and illustrations of what I'm talking about. I said a lot of noble things, good, true, beautiful. That's all well and good. But what does that look like? What it looks like first and foremost is making sure your kids have beautiful books of fairy tales. Fairy tales are a fantastic way to expose children to nobility, to virtue, to imagination, to the idea that something could be unattainable, but through perseverance, it can be attained. The idea that evil doesn't win. It doesn't. It won't. It can't. It's already been defeated. And this idea that treating people well or poorly does have consequences. That's a theme that constantly comes up in fairy tales. So 2 fairy tale books that I have for my kids where the illustrations are top notch is this one, The Steadfast Tin Soldier, retold by Cynthia Rylant and illustrated by Jen Korrentz. If you see Jen Korrentz, buy the book because her illustrations are beautiful. Obviously, The Steadfast Tin Soldier is a fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen, but the retelling by Cynthia Rylant is really beautiful. And I love Cynthia Rylant anyway. But look at these illustrations. Look how beautiful this is. Look at how gorgeous these watercolors are. Just so bright, so fun. And if you were a kid and your parent was reading you this book, you would just be so fascinated and drawn in by these illustrations. And because, like I said, they can't read, the illustrations are everything for a little kid. Beautiful. So I love the retelling of this story. One, because it's just a beautiful story, but then also the illustrations. Fantastic. All right, what else should you be getting? Another Hans Christian Andersen tale, because I love Hans Christian Andersen. This is The Tinderbox. I don't know where I was as a kid, but I didn't know this story until as an adult I bought this book for my kids. I found it at the library and then I was like, oh, that's fantastic. I'm going to buy a copy for the house. The illustrations aren't as colorful, but look at the intricacies. Look at these line drawings. So beautiful. They just draw a child's eyes in. I love this story, by the way. It's a really good one. Do you guys know The Tinderbox? Or am I just the weirdo, the outlier who had never heard this one? Anyway, it's fantastic. Love it. Hans Christian Andersen, The Tinderbox. This is retold by Stephen Mitchell. The illustrations are by Bagram Ibitolin. Ooh, I don't know if I said that right. Anyway, there we are. That's the information on that book. Okay, now, other books that kids really love are books that rhyme, that have a cadence as you're reading them, but sometimes those books can be really obnoxious because they either, after you've read them several times, you're like, I can't hear this book again. But an author who I really like who does this super well is Bill Peet. And he has books that the illustrations are fantastic, the stories are excellent, and the cadence you're not going to get tired of reading. His color pencil drawings are just intricate, but still fun and imaginative. Again, beautiful. That's a great one. Okay, a whole series of books that I have every single one of these for my kids. And this is not necessarily a story. This is actually biography, but I think that it's a great way to introduce your kids to biography and a great way to introduce them to people and characters in history who are definitely worth knowing. So this book is one that we got at a library once, and I loved it so much that I bought it I bought this and then a bunch of the books. There's one about George Washington, one about Benjamin Franklin. And again, the illustrations are fantastic, but the stories are so good. Introducing your kids to famous people in history, but the text is quite in depth. But you don't have to sit and read it all in one sitting. You can sit and read this one over time. But it's interesting. It's accessible to them. My kids love this book. They brought this book to me multiple times to hear over and over again. It's just another fantastic read, another great way to introduce them to biography and how interesting biographies can be and how thrilling it is to be inspired by somebody who came before you, because there is a certain thrill to that, to think if they did it, so can I. Okay, this is a classic. I know you've heard this one, but I picked it out just because if you're looking for a great gift for kids, every child loves this book. Stone Soup. What a classic. And if you really want to go one step further, you can actually make stone soup with your kids after you read it. When I was homeschooling my oldest, for a time, I homeschooled her for first grade, and we would do this thing called Yum Day Monday, where we would read a book that had some food-related situation in it, and then we would make whatever it was that they talked about in the book. We did that with Stone Soup. Another book we did that with was this amazing book. This is actually a newer book. But it's so good, and you can see that it's been well loved at our house. It's called A Fine Dessert. And in this book, they are talking about a recipe called Blackberry Fool, which is really just crushed fruit and whipped cream. But what's interesting about this book is that they go through, I think, 4 generations of people all making the dessert, but making the dessert with the instruments and implements that they would have had at the time to make it. So like instead of a wire whisk, they would have had a whisk made out of sticks. Later on, we come to a mother and daughter who are making it. They now have a wire whisk. We go all the way until we're blending up things with electric blender, but it's just showing that like through all the generations, all the different people who loved this dessert, all the different ways I had to fix it, how to keep everything cold. It's a historical book, but it teaches you things. It's riveting, it's interesting, and then at the end, you make the dessert with your kids, and it's a great experience. Okay. My last few books are just fun books, just books that are fun. They have great story. The pictures are interesting. One of a great book that my kids loved, and we did have the cover to it, but now the paper cover is missing. But the name of this book is The Trouble with Trolls. It's a Jan Brett book. If you know Jan Brett, you know her illustrations are always stunning and intricate and beautiful and fun to look at. There's all these little details. There's always these little side things going on to sort of tell you what's going to happen in the next part of the story. But this is just a really fun story about a little girl who meets a bunch of trolls and what she does and how she tricks them in order to get away from them and to save her dog who they're trying to steal. So that's a really fun book. Every child who has ever read that book wants to hear it about 1 billion times, and you won't mind because the pictures are interesting and the story's not that bad. I love this book. I love this book. Where was this book when I was a kid? I know it was around. It's not a new book, but I never read it. This book is called Hecate Peg. It's by Audrey Wood. Oh my goodness, you guys, look at these oil paintings. Look at these. Let me find a really good illustration here, because, I mean, they're all good, but, I mean, sorry, let me see if I can get it without the glint on it. These fantastic illustrations. Have you read this book? Everybody knows Don and Audrey Wood from their book, The Napping House, but I have not met that many people who know this book, Hecate Peg. The illustrations, superb. And it's about this witch who comes and tricks these kids into letting her turn them into food that she then plans on eating. And the mother knows each child so well that at the end of the book, she's got to guess which food is which child. Otherwise, the witch is going to eat them. Such a crazy storyline, but it's so fun. And the pictures are so exciting. So they just pull you in. Glorious oil paintings. So it's a weird kind of little book, it's an odd little fairy tale, but it's riveting, it's exciting. The pictures are to die for. This is a sweet, sweet book. It's called Peter's Old House by Elsa Beskoff. And this book is, I love this book because it's about this old guy in this village who had always gone out of his way to help everybody else. He's this interesting old man. He's friends with all the kids, but his house is falling down. And the police come and tell him they're going to tear his house down if he can't fix it up. But there's no way, and he's too poor to fix it up. And so all the children gather together with their skill set to decide how to help Peter. And they bring paint and shingles and all these things that they get from their parents. You know, one dad happens to be a bricklayer, another dad happens to be a roofer. So they gather up all this stuff and they bring it to Peter's house, and then they help him fix up his house. And in the end, they save him from having his house torn down. And it's just this really sweet story. The pictures are great, but it's a great book about how to love each other well, and how Peter, who had treated all those children so well for so many years, they all want to rally and help him in whatever little way they can. And in the end, they save his house. And then this last book is it's another sweet book that I just love. And I bet you've read this one, especially if you're from the UK. It's called Dogger by Shirley Hughes. It's a classic. It's about a little boy who loses his well-loved dog and the sacrifice that his sister makes in order for him to get his dog back when they find out where the little stuffed puppy went. It's a great story about love and sacrifice and just taking care of each other. Anyway, that is my 10 books for the next time you have to buy a child a present. And the plea that I have with you to search out for the good books. Search the good books for your kids because you're giving them such an enormous gift when you offer them something not only really interesting to listen to, that's not preachy, that's just a really great story, and that has fantastic illustrations. Thank you so much for watching, and keep an eye out for this series. I'm going to try to do one every couple of weeks. All right, bye. Talk to you later.